and a host of others.
Hurry, Bullwinkle! The show's about to start!
I'm coming as fast as I can.
Wave to the people!
I still remember the sense of anticipation every time the opening music of Rocky and Bullwinkle kicked in the screen, revealing a bumbling, talking moose, a squirrel darting back and forth through the air, and a narrator speaking in a flat, unhurried tone, as if nothing important had just happened. The animation looked cheap, the lines slightly off the colours blurred by time, and Rocky and Bullwinkle seemed like a harmless joke made for children. But few people realised that beneath that deliberately sloppy animation lay one of the boldest political satires ever to air on American television. At times, the show went so far it was almost unbelievable, a storyline that collided head-on with the White House at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. A real-world stunt in which the production team bought an island, declared it a nation, and seriously campaigned for it to become the 51st state. And an attempted revival that nearly happened until NFL lawyers stepped in to remind everyone that there are things even cartoons are not allowed to satirize. Below are 20 dark secrets of Rocky and Bullwinkle that were hidden for decades. 20. The mystery of the middle initial, a signature hidden in animation. As children, we watched Rocky and Bullwinkle innocently long. Character names were fun to say. Strange-sounding names made us laugh, and then the story rolled on. Rocket J. Squirrel, Bullwinkle J. Moose. The J in the middle gave us no reason to remember it. To a child, it was just a sound. In truth, it wasn't a random joke at all. J. Ward planted his own middle initial into both Rocky and Bullwinkle as a repeating signature quietly embedded in every episode. A personal mark spoken millions of times without anyone noticing. Every time the narrator called out Bullwinkle's name, in some sense, J. Ward was being called as well. He didn't appear as the director, nor as an all-knowing storyteller, but as part of the very structure of that world, silent, persistent, never needing to be seen. And perhaps that is exactly the spirit of Rocky and Bullwinkle. The most important things are always hidden inside what seems the most meaningless. 19. The Gullible Moose, a mirror of an overly trusting era. Bullwinkle always makes people laugh because of his very cartoonish stupidity. He misunderstands, misspeaks, trusts too easily, and is almost always led around by the nose by Boris. To a child, it's simple comedy. A fool gets into trouble, then escapes at the last second. But watched again through the eyes of someone who has lived through enough news cycles, Bullwinkle starts to look uncomfortably familiar. His innocence is systematic. He believes statements delivered in a confident tone. He believes figures who claim to represent order, security, and the right thing. And that trust is his real weakness. During the Cold War, America lived in a peculiar state. Fear was everywhere, but so was faith in authority. The media spoke in place of thought. Slogans replaced questions. Doubt was sometimes treated as betrayal. Bullwinkle reflects that condition. He isn't fooled because he's evil or incompetent, but because he believes that those standing behind microphones always know what they're doing. And when a cartoon moose keeps trusting the wrong people, the show is quietly asking its audience a question. In real life, are we doing the same thing? 18. Pottsylvania, when kids see adventure and adults see politics. One thing that's easy to forget about Rocky and Bullwinkle is the experience of watching it with adults. Children laugh at the chases, the funny accents, the villains who always lose. Adults laugh more slowly. To children, Pottsylvania is just a fictional country, a distant, bizarre place full of clumsy schemes. Boris and Natasha are clearly bad, clearly incompetent, and never truly frightening. But to adults living in the atmosphere of the Cold War, Pottsylvania feels very familiar. It's a distorted image of an enemy constantly present in news broadcasts, speeches, and everyday anxieties. Spies, propaganda, invisible power, all packaged in cartoon form, exaggerated enough not to scare children, yet accurate enough for adults to recognize. The brilliance of Rocky and Bullwinkle is that it never forces both audiences to understand the same thing. Children can watch without knowing anything about the real world. Adults can watch and see the real world being quietly punctured. 17. The familiar face of tyranny, when fascism enters a cartoon. If you watched Rocky and Bullwinkle as a child, you probably remember Fearless Leader as a strange villain. A huge head, a rigid expression, theatrical gestures and long speeches that sounded important but meant nothing. To kids, he was just a talkative bad boss, easy to hate and easy to laugh at. But to adults who lived not far removed from World War II, the image was unmistakable. Fearless Leader's design was lifted directly from wartime anti-fascist propaganda posters. The swollen head, symbolizing authoritarian ego, the cold eyes, the stone-like face, the posture of someone who believes he embodies absolute truth. It was an image an entire generation had been taught to fear. The subtlety of Rocky and Bullwinkle lies in the fact that it never explains this to children. Kids see a ridiculous dictator. Adults instantly see the shadow of leaders who once pushed the world to the brink of destruction. Animation becomes a form of history education without a lesson where the memory of war is encoded as comedy. 16. The union of evil, when even villains have to punch a time clock. I clearly remember the detail that Boris Godunov belonged to the Villains, Thieves and Cutthroats Union, Local 12, sounding like nothing more than a throwaway joke. We laughed at the absurd idea. Apparently, even being a bad guy requires union membership. Then the story moved on, and no one thought much more about it. But looking back, it's one of the sharpest satirical jabs in the series. When Rocky and Bullwinkle first aired, America was deeply divided over labor unions, workers' rights, and fears that collective structures were becoming politicized. By organizing evil itself, the show managed to poke at two targets at once: organized crime and the mechanical rigidity of systems supposedly designed to protect people. Boris isn't just a spontaneous villain. He's an employee with membership procedures and benefits. Even doing evil has to follow the rules. And that normalization is what makes it both frightening and funny. 15. One show, 3 titles and a headache for audiences. If you've ever felt confused trying to track down Rocky and Bullwinkle on old TV schedules or vintage tapes, you're not alone. From the very beginning, the show refused to settle on a single name. When it debuted in 1959, it was called Rocky and His Friends. 2 years later, when it moved to NBC, the title changed to The Bullwinkle Show. Over the decades of reruns, it continued to appear under different names depending on the network and marketing strategy. What's striking is the content barely changed. The characters stayed the same, the narrator's voice stayed the same, and the satirical spirit remained intact. The only thing that kept shifting was the brand. As a result, Rocky and Bullwinkle became a memory without a fixed label. And ironically, that confusion fits the show perfectly, a series that resisted artificial order and pushed back against corporate neatness. 14. Banned on both sides, when satire manages to offend everyone. Usually, when a show gets banned, there's a clear side opposing it. Rocky and Bullwinkle was different. It was banned in the Soviet Union for being culturally insulting and anti-communist propaganda. At the same time, in the United States, it faced censorship and criticism for ethnic stereotyping. Certain segments, such as Bullwinkle's testimonial dinner and Mucho Loma, were skipped or pulled because of portrayals of Chinese and Mexican characters that later became unacceptable. This put the show in a rare position, angering Cold War adversaries while also drawing criticism from domestic civil rights movements. Yet that discomfort from both sides reveals the series' true nature. Rocky and Bullwinkle didn't align itself with any single ideology. It took aim at power itself, no matter where that power came from. 13. When the gun can no longer fire, violence turned into a joke. As kids, every time Boris pulled out a gun, it triggered a familiar reflex. A chase was coming, danger was imminent, and then suddenly, a little flag popped out of the barrel with the word bang. Children laughed at the silliness. The threat vanished instantly, and the story went on as if nothing serious had happened. But behind that laughter was a very adult decision. At the time, American television was tightening regulations on violence, even in cartoons. Guns fights, conflict. Everything was seen as potentially harmful, no matter how unrealistic the context. And instead of dodging those rules, Rocky and Bullwinkle chose a different approach. It dragged the regulations straight into the story. The bang flag gun wasn't just a gag. It was a direct commentary on the absurdity of censorship. Violence didn't disappear, it was made ridiculous. And that ridiculousness exposed the core of the problem. When fear of regulation outweighs reality, the result isn't greater safety, but greater absurdity. 12. The Super Bowl is no joke and animation went too far. To many people, Rocky and Bullwinkle seems like something from a closed chapter of history. But in 1981, there was an attempt to bring it back, and this time the show wasn't poking at history or spies. It aimed straight at the Super Bowl, an almost untouchable symbol of American culture. In the revival script team, owners were mocked and Boris became involved in fixing the outcome of a game. From a satirical standpoint, this was classic Rocky and Bullwinkle. No form of power was off limits. But this time, the reaction was swift and ice cold. NFL lawyers stepped in, and the project was shut down immediately. The message was unmistakable. There are symbols you are not allowed to touch, even in a cartoon. Ironically, this proved exactly what Rocky and Bullwinkle had been saying all along, that satire only becomes truly dangerous when it hits the right nerve. 11. Mooseia steps into the real world when a joke refuses to stop. At first, Mooseia was just a playful detail in the show, a fictional country, an excuse for absurd situations. But like so many things in Rocky and Bullwinkle, it refused to stay confined to the screen. Jay Ward and Bill Scott did something no one expected. They bought a real island in Minnesota, declared it Mooseia, and seriously launched a campaign to have it admitted as the 51st state of the United States. This wasn't half-hearted PR. They printed documents, sold merchandise, collected signatures, and even drafted a constitution. What's remarkable is that they did it all with completely straight faces. The campaign blurred the line between fiction and reality. A cartoon suddenly became a political stage where it was no longer clear what was a joke and what was commentary. Mooseia never became a state. But it proved one thing: a joke pushed far enough can force an entire system to react. 10. When the joke knocked on the White House door. The peak of that madness came at the worst possible moment. While the Mooseia campaign was being promoted, Jay Ward and Bill Scott decided to deliver their petition to the White House right in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the United States was at its highest state of alert. The Secret Service was in no mood for humour. Every potential threat was taken seriously. And then, in the midst of that tension, two men appeared demanding recognition for a nation of moose. The outcome was almost inevitable. They were escorted off the grounds at gunpoint. That moment said everything. A cartoon had gone so far that it collided directly with the harshest political reality imaginable. The irony was nearly perfect. A Cold War satire nearly became a victim of the very atmosphere it was mocking. 9. A floating inheritance when a legacy becomes a burden. If you saw this episode as a child, you probably remember the familiar setup Bullwinkle unexpectedly inherits. A mine on Mount Flatton, absurd enough already, and then things go even further when the metal inside Obsidian causes the entire mountain to float. For children, it's pure cartoon logic. Rocks flying into the sky reality bent out of shape, a world running on its own rules. But viewed again later, the storyline takes on a different tone. Bullwinkle doesn't simply get lucky, he's saddled with a responsibility he neither understands nor controls. An inheritance isn't always a blessing. It brings consequences, it disrupts order, and sometimes it makes everything quite literally lose its gravity. The show uses a ridiculous science fiction concept to talk about something very real. When ownership arrives without preparation, it can easily become a burden rather than a reward. 8. A name for adults. Boris Godunov, hidden behind laughter. As a child, the name Boris Godunov just sounds funny. Saying it out loud feels sharp and villainous, perfectly suited to a bumbling bad guy who always loses. Kids don't need to know anything more. But for adults, especially those familiar with history literature or even opera, the name carries another layer. Godunov is a wordplay reference to Boris Godunov, the 16th century Russian Tsar, a historical figure associated with unstable power, intrigue and decline. This wasn't accidental. The writers of Rocky and Bullwinkle deliberately planted a high culture reference inside a children's cartoon airing in a kid's time slot. Children see a foolish villain. Adults see an entire tradition of Russian power distorted into farce. 7. Pie-powered invention. When the kitchen becomes a launch pad. The very first storyline of Rocky and Bullwinkle doesn't open with a global conspiracy or a looming catastrophe. It starts with Grandma's pie recipe, something rooted in the kitchen in domestic life in a kind of ordinariness, so mundane it's almost dull. And then, entirely by accident, that recipe becomes rocket fuel. For children, it's a silly idea, pie turning into thrust and oven, leading to outer space logic bent in a very cartoonish way. But, in retrospect, this wasn't a random choice. From its very first episode, the show declared a clear philosophy: the most ordinary things can contain the greatest potential for chaos. 6. The Mexico gamble, when technical flaws become style. If you think back to Rocky and Bullwinkle, you might remember a familiar feeling. The characters look slightly different from scene to scene. Fur colours subtly shift, faces skew, movements stiffen, sometimes bordering on outright wrong. As kids, we only knew that this cartoon didn't look like the other nice-looking animations on TV. The reason lies in a risky decision by Jay Ward, outsourcing all animation work to Gamma Productions in southern Mexico. It was a choice driven by a tight budget, but the consequences went far beyond expectations. Ward didn't hire traditional animators, didn't tightly control every frame, and accepted a level of unpredictability. The result was wildly inconsistent animation quality. The characters were never entirely stable. Yet strangely enough, that instability became a defining trait. Rocky and Bullwinkle didn't look polished or smooth, and because of that, it didn't feel like an industrial product. 5. Frostbite Falls, where the cold keeps everything still. Frostbite. Falls always feels impossibly distant. Snow year-round. A small town, a slow pace of life. As children, we saw it simply as a funny backdrop from which the two main characters launched their adventures. But the name wasn't entirely fictional. Jay Ward drew direct inspiration from International Falls, Minnesota, known as the Freezer of America, with more than 100 days each year below Dugstay. A remote freezing place almost cut off from the rest of the country. And that isolation made it the perfect setting. The outside world is full of chaos, but Frostbite Falls preserves a kind of innocent, slow-moving, slightly outdated, an America that never quite finished modernizing. 4. One Voice, Two Worlds. Almost no one realizes that Rocky's bright, sincere voice and Natasha's low, drawn-out, menacing tone come from the same person. Both were voiced by June Foray. Within a single episode, sometimes within the same scene, Foray had to switch between two extremes: American innocence and Eastern European menace, using nothing but rhythm and vocal colour. A skill considered legendary today, yet almost invisible at the time. What's fascinating is how perfectly that contrast mirrors the spirit of the show. Heroes and villains in this world can come from the same source. The difference lies in how they speak, how they see the world, not in their biological nature. 3. When box tops become an economic pillar. As a child, this idea probably just made you laugh, a global economy dependent on cereal box top rebates. It sounds far too ridiculous to take seriously. And that's exactly why it works. In this storyline, Boris and Natasha try to destroy the world with counterfeit box tops. No bombs, no wars, just consumer fraud and systemic collapse. It's a surprisingly deep piece of satire. Rocky and Bullwinkle is pointing to the fragility of modern economic structures where value no longer rests in material goods, but in trust conventions and promotional schemes that seem harmless on the surface. 2. Disney tried and stopped. In the mid-1980s, Disney explored the idea of reviving Rocky and Bullwinkle. The project was developed by Tad Stones and Michael Pezier Jr. On paper, everything made sense: a strong brand, built-in nostalgia, and an existing audience. Yet the project never materialized. The reason wasn't technical or financial, it was tonal. Rocky and Bullwinkle needs sharp edges, it needs political satire, it needs the freedom to offend. And those qualities are difficult to sustain within the Disney environment where safety, family friendliness, and neutrality are top priorities. 1. When Bullwinkle flew over the American sky. For more than 25 years, the Bullwinkle balloon appeared regularly at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Children looked up, adults smiled. A cartoon character became part of a national ritual. Each year, keeping that massive balloon from drifting away was a technical challenge. Yet it returned year after year, quietly and persistently. It's a beautiful image, and one perfectly aligned with the spirit of Rocky and Bullwinkle. An imperfect show that outlasted so many others because it understood something essential to become part of collective memory. Sometimes all you need is to appear in the right place at the right time and long enough. There are shows that live only in childhood, and there are shows that wait until you're old enough before they start speaking honestly to you. Rocky and Bullwinkle belongs to the second kind. It doesn't teach, preach, or demand to be understood. It simply lays everything out and trusts that sooner or later you'll piece it together yourself. If this show was part of your childhood, think about this: which detail felt completely different when you revisited it as an adult? Leave a comment and share that moment, and if you enjoy film and television stories unpacked slowly, deeply, and without easy answers, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next videos.